to discuss the performance of China's women's soccer team. I'm joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Yan Qiang, who is the deputy editor of NetEase.com and also a long-term football commentator. Welcome to our program. Meanwhile, in Beijing, we're joined by Mr. Dong Jun, who is a sports commentator with us. And in London, we are joined by Mr. Mihir Bose, who is the former BBC sports editor and now a columnist for the London Evening Standard. His new book is called The Spirit of the Game. It's now available in paperback. While doing a promotion for you, while at the same time doing promotion for our women's soccer team. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. First of all, I have to ask the two Chinese gentlemen sitting with us here, what do you think of the Chinese women's soccer team this time in the World Cup? Mr. Yan?
It's a breakthrough. You know, we haven't been entered this stage for years, and lastly, I think most of football fans in China would remember the 1999 World Cup final between China and the USA. Now we're in the quarterfinal. We're going to competing against the USA team. So I think at least the Saturday match will be guaranteed very popular match in China.
Yes, indeed. But it is not very often, if I remember right, Mr. Dong, that the Chinese audience will set their eyes on the women's soccer team, even though the men's soccer team, their performance, whether good or not, are very popular here in this country.
Well, I think we still need to check out the statistics to really prove that larger crowds of people are watching this team. I mean, than back in 1999 when in the Rose Bowl in California, U.S. versus China. I'm not sure, but it's fair to say that the attention is back on this team because they virtually disappeared from from the news for quite a few years.
Why is that?
I think compared with men's football or soccer, women's football is still much less commercialized. So it still takes a centralized training system like that of China to catch up with the pace of the world more quickly.
Mr. Rose, of course, you are coming from the international perspective. It is no secret that women's soccer teams all over the world, they are underpaid, under-sponsored, they are not earning as much attention as their male counterparts in any country. But do you think that is in any way changing as more girls are actually on the field kicking the balls?
Well, there are some signs of changing. You talked about China. In England, the English team has got to the quarterfinals. There's been a lot of interest. It's shown on television, a lot of newspaper comment, and so on. And incidentally, I saw that 1999 final live, and the USA winning goes back a long way. I think there are two issues here. First of all, do we have the infrastructure for the women's game to develop worldwide? That means, are there the coaches, are there the pitches, are there the training facilities, are there the school teachers willing to give their time to coach the students? And I think we also must face up to the fact, and this is again a worldwide phenomenon, are there the social factors available? Do the parents want their daughters to play football? Will they allow them time? Will they encourage them? Or will they say, no, you must become, there's a very common saying in this country, particularly for the Asians, that you want to be a doctor and a lawyer, and certainly for a woman perhaps certainly becoming a doctor or a lawyer will earn you more money than if you try and become a Messi and score from a free kick.
All right, I guess to become a doctor and a lawyer is the dream of many around the world, not just for Chinese and Asian parents. But let me ask you, Mr. Yan, the two questions mentioned by Mr. Bose. Infrastructures, for example, material situation, and also the mentality. Is that ready in China for women's soccer to take off?
No. We don't even have enough infrastructure for our men's team, men's football. So
is there a difference between the men's football's infrastructure and the women's?
But you have to put the priority to the men's team or to the boys' team.
Why is that?
Well, this is what happens, because they attract more attention. They are more commercialized. They are better to watch, in the larger sense. Of course, the women's full international team, they play very good football. To some audience, it's even better than men's football. But overall, how many teams do we have here? Female teams. I would count with, yeah, kind of with my hands and Mr. Dong's hand, that will be enough. We have less than 20 teams in this country. So there is no success of organizing a league. We did have a league called the China Super Women's Football League, but it didn't last for more than 5 years. So that's impossible. I would say we do have a decent full women's international team, but we do not have this sport here in China.
How long would it take, Mr. Dong, for example, in China, when children all over this country are looking for their idols among the sports stars? Once there would become one that is so-called a female soccer star. In fact, people could even afford to erase the male and female adjectives in front of the soccer star.
You're talking about the female Messi, right?
Well, maybe we don't even have to mention it's a female Messi, but rather just a Messi,
But she needs to earn as much as Messi.
Does the honor really come with the material success, Mr. Dong?
Yeah, we should acknowledge that, because of the internet has changed so much, the way news and information get disseminated among younger people, younger generation. But for people of our age, we can easily remember that once China did have a very famous star, like a women's Messi, who was voted player of the century, of the 20th century, who represented China to play against the USA several times. Her name is Sun Wen.
Sun Wen, yeah.
And she retired just a few years ago.
She's the team leader of the Chinese
she
team,
team
when
leader,
China was getting the second in the World Cup, of course.
So I don't think it's that extremely difficult for us to have another Sun Wen.
But can we have a men's Messi first?
Well, we don't even have a male Messi, right? We probably could have a female Messi first before we have a male one. We don't know. Let's go to Mr. Bowles. We see a lot of internal discussions already taking place, Mr. Bowles, here in China. But let me ask you, is it possible, let's just say, in some of the countries in which soccer is extremely popular, for example, in England, that young people can take a look at the sports stars and ignore the fact that they are quote-unquote male or female, particularly in soccer? Is that possible? Are we going to see that kind of honor and potential for both teams?
It is possible, but it'll take time. Remember, even a few years ago, and even in Europe, for instance, in Norway, women were not allowed to play football. In England, it was considered that it was not right for girls. And this was some years ago, but nevertheless, this is recent history, if you like. So you have to overcome that baggage of history. That's the start. As you mentioned, you need role models. In any sport, you need role models. And the other thing to warn against is what you're saying is, how can women play as well as men? There are biological factors. So I think what women's soccer should aim for is being like tennis or swimming, where there are some great women stars and they're great swimmers, and there have been some very good Chinese women players. So I think that is where the aim should be, but it'll take time. You require the right models, you require the right persons to come up, and somebody to break through the glass ceiling. Not be a Lionel Messi,
right,
but be the female star who can be as good as Lionel Messi.
All right. What does it take, Mr. Yan? Does it take national honors in a way in order for the female team or for the public to accept that? Does it take gender equity? Does it take commercial success? Does it take an overall change of the social atmosphere in this country and many others as well in order to achieve what Mr. Bowles has beautifully illustrated?
None of the above. I would say that the whole sport, the women's football, needs to change. Women's football should be deemed as a sport to be played, to be enjoyed by women, by girls, by all ladies, by all females. But nowadays, if you look at the Canada
not
World
by males,
Cup,
not by the other half of society, we argue?
Exactly the same like males, like men's football. So that's not, I would not say that's really good for women's football to develop. You would not imagine all the women's football to be played exactly in the same way like men's football. And we're sitting here talking about Lionel Messi. No, I think, females, big stars in football, they should have their own style. Maybe the rules, even the size of the pitch needs to change, even all the disciplines.
Okay, well, you're talking about a very big issue over there. Probably
Yeah.
there's some rules adjustment over there. But Dongjun, if I remember right, 3 decades ago, there was a Chinese female team that was extremely popular in this country. Even though it is not about the soccer, it is volleyball. But it did manage to become the national hero. It did manage to have everyone in China aspiring it to. And it did manage to, in a way, boost the spirit among the girls in this country to get into sports. But some argue that has a lot to do with the lack of access for Chinese at that time to the international sports, because that's probably the only team that's really getting the world titles at the time. But now today, things are very different. So I'm asking one simple question, that is that rendezvous gonna come back? Is that going to come back in a very different way for women's sports to get prosperous in this country?
I still believe that the Chinese women's team stands a great chance, even compared with those years back in the early 1980s, because China has really, hasn't really made any, breakthrough in such a team sport on the world stage, involving 11 players at one time competing against another national team, because most of the Chinese glories or medals won are by individuals. So I think once the Chinese women's team, women's soccer team or volleyball team or basketball team, once they got a chance to enter into the final 8, the last 4, they could easily catch national attention.
Okay, my final question for both Mr. Bose and Mr. Yan would be this. We have very short attention spans, gentlemen, unfortunately. So people pay attention to women's sport, soccer team, let's just say in China, but that kind of passion might pass very soon, in fact, during a very short period of time. So, Mr. Bose, is there a way to sustain this kind of passion for people to pay attention to women's sports and hopefully soccer as well? Mr. Bose, briefly.
Well, if China beats America, which it has never done, that will ignite the passion in sport. When you win something big, which is not expected, and this has happened in different sports over a period of time, and I'll give you 2 examples. West Germany beating Hungary in the 1954 World Cup, and the Indians winning the Cricket World Cup in 1983. When that happens, it can break barriers. Suddenly you have somebody you can aspire to. Suddenly people follow you. And if they do that, I think that will achieve something and will start the process. It'll take time, it won't happen overnight, but it can happen.
Mr. Yan, Mr. Bose is putting a lot of pressure on the women team now for the
I
quarterfinal
agree
with
you
the US.
totally. Let's beat the American team.
Is that possible though?
Of course.
How much hope are we having right now?
Very slim chance.
Yeah, 20%.
Well, we want to cheer for the ladies in the Chinese team, but at the same time, we want to be realistic as well. But the question is how to sustain that quote-unquote the fire. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. The 3 gentlemen with me talking about women's soccer. What a great job you have just done. Mr. Yan Qiang, Mr. Dong Jun here in Beijing, and also Mr. Bose in London with us. Thank you so much, gentlemen.